2 words, Revo Fitness. Here's a few more. Simple, 24/7, reformer Pilates, body scanners, massage chairs, squat racks, free weights, pin and plate loaded equipment, no lock-in contracts, no bullshit. All of that and more from just $9.69 a week. That's surprisingly affordable. Join now at Revo Fitness Windsor Gardens or download the Revo Fitness app. RevoFitness.com.au or find the Revo Fitness app in the App Store.
We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast was produced, the Gadigal People of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present.
It's 2015 and we're in grey, wintry Amsterdam. It's cold outside, but it's even colder in here. The cryotherapy studio where Johannes Egberts is putting on his hat, gloves and boots. He's here at the suggestion of his brother, who's working in the new health facility alongside a man called Wim Hof. Johannes's brother is desperately attempting to make him feel better. Johannes is at rock bottom. He was recently arrested and detained in Sri Lanka, a traumatic experience that also led to the fracture of his relationship. At just 20 years old, Johannes can't see a way out. He's been feeling numb and empty for months. The chamber is minus 90 degrees. He steps in. The rush of adrenaline hits him. Johannes is back in his body. He feels like himself again. Tears roll down his face, instantly freezing. This is the moment that will change the course of Johannes's life forever. I'm at Middleton, and this is Headgame. Today, one of the world's leading cold therapy experts on the moment that saved him. Johannes, how are you, buddy?
I'm very well. I'm very happy to be here with you.
Mate, I love your calming, very soothing approach. I'm sort of the opposite. I'm super energetic. I need some of that calming aura and energy so I can stay grounded in my seat. Now, tell me, Johannes, what is breathwork?
Breathwork, so conscious modulation of our respiration and then the role that that has to play in human transformation. And that is a very fancy way of saying anytime that you change your breathing in order to change your state of mind, your state of being. So, I mean, it's something that's all this time itself, right? People have always known about the power of the breath, the power that resides in the human respiratory system. But I think really in the last 20, maybe 40 years or so, breathwork has made its way to the West. And we're seeing this convergence of East and West, of old and contemporary, of ancient and science and spirituality can sort of meet in this point of the breath. That's how I see it. So the breath is a bit of a bridge, and that's what breathwork, I think, also is. And I think that's why it's here today. That's the role that it has to play in our society now, is to sort of reconnect us in a certain way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that we take for granted, don't we? Because we subconsciously just breathe in and out. And, you know, when we get a bit more tired or a bit more active, we breathe a lot heavier and we don't think about controlling it because it almost controls itself. So we don't think about it. But when we subconsciously think about our breathing techniques and you know, the oxygen and the air that we're breathing, that's when it really comes into light, isn't it?
100%. Yeah, I'm actually curious to also talk to you about the career that you've had and the role that breath has had to play in that. But you're spot on with that. This is what makes breath so unique. It's both happening to you moment to moment, but you can also step in and control it. So it is one of the only functions, one of the only parts of the autonomic nervous system, if you will, that has a bridge also with the somatic nervous system. In other words, you can consciously control your breathing, but it is also happening to you moment to moment. And I like to say sometimes that your breath is therefore either your best friend, if you do have control over it, or your worst enemy. Because as you sort of alluded to, in the worst moments, your breath is taken away from you. And when you lose your breath, you are out of control, right? And unfortunately, the world is breathless today. There's a lot of people walking around with really poor breathing habits. And yeah, it is in that way, it is a little bit like you do not have control over your state of being. The flip side of that is that when you do learn some of these simple techniques, and maybe we get a chance to discuss some of them today, it is literally like someone has given you the remote control to your body, to your nervous system, and you're back in the player's seat.
Yeah, I love that. Have you always been like this as a youngster, or have you learnt, that this is the way, this is what life is, the essence of life is truly about, is breathing?
I can say absolutely not. Meaning that I was out of control in a really big way. And it started very early. I've traced this back all the way to my first few years, right? In this kind of game of following breadcrumbs as to like, where did this begin? But, life was difficult for me at a young age. I struggled. I struggled to concentrate. I struggled to just be in my body, to be in my experience. And it's always felt like things were hard. Things were harder for me somehow, is how I used to, the words I used to speak all the time. And I mean, this all came to a head in my teenage years, to give you a picture of being out of control. Probably from about, 13 onwards, I couldn't quite be in school anymore. And so that was a difficult thing for me. I basically was set astray, right? Like a ship without a rudder for a number of years. There was a lot of drugs. Basically that time feels almost like a bit of a black hole to me, even thinking back about it now, right? And right up to about 16 years of age, and working menial jobs, night shifts, factories, car factory. I did all sorts of things, right, just to kind of get by. And at this point, I really had this sense of like, what is the point, right? You are just a cog in the machine here. I remember showing up to some of these jobs, right, and you're wearing an overall and you have a number on it, and people actually call you by your number. I remember things like that and thinking, this is a low point.
I've been there as well. I've been there as well.
It's drab, isn't it? Yeah, grey. And seeing people there that have been doing that, that possibility of, is this going to be me for the next 20, 30 years if I don't figure this out? The consequences of, have I missed some of the forks in the road here, right? And am I just now on this track to nowhere? But I did keep searching, and I was quite early to start traveling at that point. So at 16, I figured out that I could actually go. It was quite an experience, and so I did. I kind of roamed around the south of France for a while with a bunch of gypsies. We picked grapes. We went on all different adventures. The coast of Spain, I saw at quite an early age, which was quite an experience, as you can imagine. And then I actually found my way to Thailand, and I spent 6 months there. And that was like a nourishing for the soul at the time. I worked as an English teacher. I volunteered. I figured that if you work as a volunteer, you can actually travel. You can get a special visa at that age. And that was like the light came back into my eyes. There was a real sense of appreciation, of belonging, of having purpose, of doing something of value, of meaning. It was a very healthy environment to be in as well, with other people my age or a little bit older. And at that point, my mission became, how do I keep this going? How do I stay on this track?
It sounds like that Thailand was a place where you could take off all this body armor, sort of get rid of all these masks. Did you feel like that was the start of your journey in Thailand, where all of that could come off and you could just be 100% yourself, and then grow and evolve that? Yeah,
definitely. At the time, that was definitely like a crossroad. I remember going out there and sitting on the airplane and just thinking to myself, nobody is going to know me on the other side of the world. Like, I get to decide here, right? And that also is that coming of age moment, of course, of, what if I am none of these things? What if I am none of these masks that I've been wearing? I get to play, right? And there's such freedom in that, to just explore and then to basically craft a new identity of sorts, right? And craft it around a new set of belief, a new set of principles and ideas and values, and to also have that environment feed it back to you. That was wonderful. And that went on for a period of time, which is a really beautiful thing. And then eventually the integration of both of those worlds. And that is probably a chapter that I'm only really coming to terms with in the last couple of years, to go, what is really underneath all of this? I spoke to it earlier, following the breadcrumbs all the way down to the beginning and figuring out that actually, like, all of these parts and all of these masks and all of these pain points, like, they all have incredible value, right? And they integrated, they become, right, this new version. I mean, I'm 30, right? And so I'm a little bit probably less ahead on the journey as you are, but it is also a really beautiful time. It is also a really beautiful period. Can you tell by the grey
in my beard?
Yeah.
When did you connect this sort of spiritual journey that you were going on with breathwork? When did that sort of come into fruition? Or was that a natural progress into that of of self-discovery, let's call it?
No, I had to go really low to be open enough to really like try on these practices and things. And when I say really, I was 21 years of age, right? I'd spent half a decade at this point essentially running away from myself and running towards something new also, as we discussed. But there was a lot of patterns that were building along the way also. And so I just took on way too much in those first couple of years in Australia. I was in a relationship. I had a number of like full-time jobs and positions, sometimes two at the same time, right? I was working as a head chef in a cafe. I was working as a sculptor. I was making bronze sculptures, doing an apprenticeship as that. And I was having a great time, but it was a lot, right? I was basically living on the precipice of burnout. And in the Netherlands, we say this thing about the drip that makes the bucket flow over. I had one of those moments, and it is not a great story, but me and my partner at the time had traveled to Sri Lanka to try and repair our relationship and to try and make it work, right? And safe to say that wasn't succeeding. And really at the lowest moment, something quite tragic happened. She had a tattoo of a Buddha. It's quite an odd scenario, but it's not just frowned upon. It is a crime in Sri Lanka, and we were aware of that. But we went surfing one day. She took off her leggings, and it was spotted. It was seen, and what ensued were 7 of the worst days of my life. We were basically assaulted right then and there, and we tried to get away from it, but it erupted into a big confrontation, and we were imprisoned. We hadn't much information about what this meant. We found an article, and there was a lawyer that was presented to us who told us this story about a DJ who had spun at a trance party, spun like a Buddha's head on one of his sets, right? And he spent 9 months in prison in this jail cell. And I spiraled. I went into quite a dissociative state. They maltreated us quite badly in this prison. The entire village was very upset. I stayed with her the entire time, but I was physically there, but I was like I was living behind myself, right? And very quickly this erupted into something out of a movie. We were being spat upon. They were sort of telling us all these stories about, you just come to court for one moment, and tomorrow we'll let you go, and you just hand in your passport, and then you have it back. And it was just lies upon lies upon lies, and it turned out very quickly, even the lawyer and things, there's nobody we could trust, right? And then luckily I had met this Dutch gentleman on the beach a couple of days before. I played a game of backgammon with him, and he happened to own half the hotels on this side of the island's coast. And so we managed to get in contact with him, and he essentially came to our cell 1 a.m. or something and said, "You're coming with me right now. You're speaking to this person when you get to the airport. You're getting on this bus. You will never ever come back to Sri Lanka." and off we went. And it was intense.
And what was the period of time that you were locked up for?
It was close to a week. Yeah.
So you go to the beach surfing, thinking that you're going to be back at the hotel. You're figuring things out with your partner. You're in a really good place, and then all of a sudden, and I can relate to what you said. Then you were there physically, but psychologically you were just disconnected. You weren't there. Does it feel like a bit of a blur psychologically, or was it just pure survival in that moment?
The way I describe it is third-person video game. You are a character in the movie from that moment on, but you are far behind yourself. And the moment this was very real was when we landed in Singapore airport. Now, to describe the state that we were in, we were so disheveled that we immediately got arrested again. I thought we had finally gotten to safety, right? So we'd been awake like a whole night at this point, and we got in there, and I almost wanted to kiss the ground, right? I was like, oh my God, we made it through. And they, as soon as we walked into the lobby, they said, please come with us, right? And the reason why is because of how we looked. I mean, my clothes were torn. We were so disheveled that they were convinced that we had swallowed drugs because of the state that we were in. They were 100% sure. And so they told us later, like, we were convinced that you guys were smugglers and that you had, that something had gone wrong. And so we actually were wanting to basically give you guys medical attention. And after we'd explained what had happened, everything was fine. But the moment of that moment when it was like we're safe and then we were not, that was when I just went up to the ceiling. And it was from then on, and this went on for a couple of weeks. It was like I was just looking down upon myself from behind myself, right? And that was the dissociative state. And I recognized this in certain parts of my life, that perhaps I was not quite present, right? And this is a nervous system function of freeze, we call it, right? It's a survival response where the body decides, I can't fight, I can't flight, I can't quite use my normal survival mechanisms to make my way out of this state. And so the only way that I can make it through is to relegate it to the unconscious and to choose a more less energy intensive form of coping, right? Which is this dissociative freeze state. And of course, it's there to protect you. It's there to survive you. It's a heroic act, is how one of my mentors describes it, right? He said the body saved the day right there for you, but it doesn't feel like that in the moment. And to cut the story short, right? It went on for a while longer. There was more tragedy, more things. Eventually, I tried a number of different things to cope, right? I did a lot of yoga, I did a lot of things, fasting, flow tanks, you name it. Read all of the possible audiobooks in the world. I meditated, eventually I medicated, and the stress had gotten so bad that my physical body started to come apart. I was diagnosed with ulcers at one point, couldn't really process my food anymore, went big into this isolated state and didn't know how to ask for help, didn't know how to tell people about what had happened at the point. There was no empathic witness there for me. I went back to the Netherlands after taking the full bottle of medication one night and essentially sleeping almost 3 nights. And that was the lowest point. So I'm there. I hadn't been there in a number of years. My life back overseas is in tatters. There's heaps of things for me still to resolve. And this is when I was lucky to be taken in by my brother. He worked for the first cryotherapy studio in Amsterdam. 2015,
so that's where the breathwork started.
That's where it started, because he was connected to a guy called Wim Hof. Right, and you've probably known
we all know Wim Hof. Yeah,
he came to play a really big part in my life for the 5 years to follow. He became a close friend and mentor. We traveled around the world together. But this first encounter was the most significant one. Right, I remember stepping into that cryotherapy studio for the first time. I wasn't even there. Again, I was walking behind myself. I was flat, empty, dejected. But it awoke something in me. Right, it cracked some sort of a layer, and then the breathing exercises that we practiced, I was given very little instructions. The only thing they said was, don't fucking stop breathing.
Two words, Revo Fitness. Here's a few more. Simple, 24/7, reformer Pilates, body scanners, massage chairs, squat racks, free weights, pin and plate loaded equipment, no lock-in contracts, no bullshit. All of that and more from just $9.69 a week. That's surprisingly affordable. Join now at Revo Fitness Windsor Gardens or download the Revo Fitness app, revofitness.com.au, or find the Revo Fitness app in the App Store.
So is your brother that recognised that you were in a dark, bad place? You didn't go and ask for help. I suppose he was so connected that he recognised your disconnection. Was that safe to say?
He's an angel. He's been an angel throughout my life. He's the one that when I was driving the forklifts in the middle of the night, he down through my iPod shuffle full of audiobooks by Eckhart Tolle and you name it, and always giving me the nudges in the right direction and planting the seeds ready to be picked up for me whenever I was ready. And you're right, he had a 10-year meditation practice at this point, and he had a level of connection, and it was beyond words. I think again, I could not really express what had happened to me. I didn't have the words. It was too much. It was too much for me to process. Right, I was dissociating it out of my awareness for a reason, and so I didn't want to go back there. I was in a state of shell shockness almost, right?
And I love when you said about that first session, put me in your skin for that very first moment, because it's such, like you said, within 30 minutes, it transformed your life. Just talk us through how that looked and how it felt, and because it's such a pivotal point on you being who you are today.
Let's begin with the breathwork. And that's where it started. It was very simple. Early morning, lay down, few instructions, and the process begins, right? You take deep breaths in. And again, I was a free diver at this point already, right? I could do yoga. I could drop into the splits, right? I had these ideas about myself and about what breathing meant, But this was completely different. Within 5 minutes of the rapid breathing, I felt my senses come alive, right? Tingling sensations throughout my fingers and arms, pressure in my chest. It was almost like all the anxiety that had mounted and built was actually intensified first and foremost before it was released, right? And so, but I had this voice in my mind of like, don't fucking stop breathing. And so I did continue to push past. the most remarkable thing happened probably right there, about between 5 to 10 minutes into this experience. It was like I'm still looking down from the ceiling upon myself, right? And it was almost like we did this thing where you hold your breath, and you could hold your breath for minutes at a time. And this was really significant for me. It was like a very peaceful place. And then I was like someone put a defibrillator on my soul, on my chest, and I could see myself climb back into my body. And I actually remember getting up. I stood up in the middle of the exercise, and I was like looking at my fingers and going, I am alive again. And I said, oh my God, you've healed me. And tears were coming down my face, which is something that had not happened in a long time. And I was sort of laughing at the same time. And I got a very dry stare saying, idiot, lay back down. We've only just begun. And they were right. And this was something that would continue for years, where I would continue the breathing exercises in the morning. But towards the end of that experience, I ended in this really serene, peaceful state. And in that state where in my physiology, my nervous system had somehow been able to complete that truncated survival response, right? That energy that had mounted but had been relegated to the unconscious, it had somehow been processed. The tears had been cried without much cognition. It wasn't that I was feeling sad or grieving. It was more that the body was able to move through the motions that it couldn't weeks before that. And after that had happened, I could then lay there and in some sense of peace, in at least pure physical comfort, a state of almost floating inside of my body, being extremely present and comfortable, I could see the events processing before me. I could more clearly see what had happened and how it wasn't my fault. And this story of I can't meet the mark and I am a black hole and everything is ruined. It was like the internalization of the negative emotions, which had come to be accompanied with the stored survival responses, unlocked in the same moment through this one breathing exercise. And I mean, this is the goal of therapy, right? This is what people spend years trying to achieve through like a dedicated process of relational safety. And I had no idea about any of this, right? And I'm just laying here as a 20-year-old going through these breathing exercises and having this really profound awakening. And at the point I was watching myself again, but this time I was watching from a very peaceful place of observation where I was seeing myself with compassion. I was being the witness that I didn't had in the worst moment. So it was almost like I was now watching myself go through the same motions, but with like a loving attention and like a real compassion and like crying these tears for myself. And all of this took place in like a 5-minute stillness meditation at the end of a breathing exercise. So safe to say, I opened my eyes and I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how it worked, and nobody could really tell me at the time. I spent a decade figuring out how something so seemingly simple can have such a profound effect, and that's been my journey, in the last 10 years, is studying this like from all over the world and doing the research and things of that nature. Because I was dumbfounded that something like breathing could give me that profound effect. And mind you, I had been trying a lot of other things. So that was the moment, and I got up and I had this hope, right? And I had this commitment, this conviction of like, I don't care. I throw the medication in the bin. I'm going to do this breathing exercise. It also then primed me for that cryotherapy experience, which was next, right? And that was the thing that the breathwork cleared out something, and the cryotherapy put something back in. Right, it was like standing there. And so to go back to the picture, you have these two freezers, right? There's different ways of doing it. And this was in the Amsterdam Arena, and they had quite an intense way where you walk into a freezer that is about the size of a commercial kitchen freezer, and you stand there for about a minute, and it is minus 90 degrees, right? And then a door opens, and this hydrogen mist comes out, and you walk into it, and it is minus 130 degrees, and you stand there for about 2.5 minutes, and that is the real experience, right? And they play this silly music of like ice, baby, and I'm still feeling a little bit, out of it, and but something happened where again, I actually recall this one moment of like, what's happening? I could feel that there was a frozen tear on my face, right? And so it awoke a part of me, right? It brought me back to my senses in quite a powerful way. And here's the thing about the cold: when you get out of the experience it really begins, right? You get this rush of endorphins, and in recent years they've discovered that the dopamine releases 250% of your average numbers for 3 hours afterwards, and that is a massive mood booster, right? It's one of the biggest ones I know that you can get as a natural hit, a natural high. But that is also your neurochemistry of motivation, of initiating new tasks, and of really, we're just a makeup of neurochemistry, right? So to be able to consciously control that was what those experiences together had done for me. First the breathwork, and then this cold exposure on top of it. I was a new man. And the amazing thing about this, really, if you ask me, was that I hardly even spoke to anybody about this. That day ended, and I still didn't quite find the words to sort of tell people what had happened. It took me years to actually learn to speak this story out without sort of having that emotional well and finding that peace within myself, right? But I went back to Australia, and there was a lot of loose ends for me to tie together, and I had this new vigor in my step, right? And I think I left the day after this experience. I got back on a plane, and I just went, here we go again. We're broke. We're in debt. we don't have much going for us right now. I spent a couple of months living in a storage unit. I had a full-time job. I had a lot of stuff to work out. But every morning I did this simple breathing exercise, right? And then I jumped into a cold shower. And it was so remarkable because there was hardly anything else that I did that would normally be, if I talk to my therapist now and I explain this process, they would go, oh my God, that's not how you go about it, right? And I would actually say the same thing to people if they were coming to me to learn how to practice these things. I would say, make sure that you are incredibly resourced, right? Make sure that you have a support network, make sure that you have safety around you, make sure that you're grounded, make sure that, you don't put too much pressure on myself. But I had burned the boats to a certain extent.
But you'd always done that. It sounds like that you've always done that, Johannes, that you've always gone out there, you always dived in the deep end and figured it out. You either tread water or you'd start to swim, get somewhere, and you'd start to go down. Talk about a motivation to keep on going and a purpose to keep on moving forward. And I love that in your story. So you mentioned the natural highs. So the natural highs for you is the breathing, and then you went onto the cryotherapy. How important is it to get cryotherapy right? You mentioned there roughly that you jumped in the deep end to figure it out, but it's important that those things are done in a controlled manner. And you're lucky enough to have sort of Wim Hof and your brother as mentors, so you're getting it. But how important is it to really break this process down? And because it's a lifelong process, right? It doesn't really stop.
100%, and it's shown up to me in so many different ways over the years, and I've experimented with it for myself, and I have also spent time with someone like Wim Hof and done things like climb the mountain without the shorts. We used to do these expeditions, we still do actually, where we take people into these extreme environments, and there's some amazing lessons to be learned in these peak experiences, right? And so I would categorize it in that nature is the daily thing is probably what makes the biggest impact. Sometimes we need the big experience to get us to the starting line, right? We need something that shakes us out of our routine, out of our rut, and just brings that aliveness back in, right? We need to go where we feel most alive. But then the question, of course, is for the everyday person is like, how do you actually translate that into everyday living with, 10, 15% more focus, more happiness, more energy. And these are the real things that move the needle ultimately. And so for me, the cold showers are a wonderful place to start. And what I'm trying to say here is you don't need to go to the extreme to reap the rewards, right? It's very good to become inspired. I was very inspired by some of the things that I was seeing out there at the time, but I've had to unlearn a lot of that over the years to really figure out how do I actually create lasting, sustainable, positive impact on myself and the people I work with, right? Without sort of blowing the candle on both ends and things like that. And so, look, it's become very commercially available today as well, the ice bathing, which is super powerful. We started a bit of a revolution in Australia with people doing it on the beach every morning and organizing these community type events. And that is really a wonderful thing. If you can find yourself a weekly opportunity to do an ice bath, and the science has actually shown that you only need to do it for about 2 minutes as well. In fact, from about 3 minutes to 5 minutes onwards, there's a potential for diminishing returns.
Oh, really?
And so again, if we want to harness the natural high and the positive energy, it's actually important that we do it in a really sustainable way. Then maybe you challenge yourself every now and then, but I say to people, if you can have a cold shower every day, right, without negotiation, that is such a wonderful place to begin. If you can turn that tap to
and
blue.
you reckon 2 minutes?
Yeah, so, and if you need to build up to it, we often say, look, begin with 30 seconds at the end. To be totally honest, I found that the less you negotiate, the better. And so just learning to spend about a week crossing that initial hurdle. Just get right under there. Just step into it full force and learn to control your breath in that situation. And you'll gain so much more from that than dipping the toe in the water is my experience. This is training ground for your breath, right? Which is really potent and powerful. And so learning to control your breath is such a powerful thing. And if you give yourself that stimulus to learn to, if you intentionally take your breath away, like life will in different points, you now are teaching yourself to also control it in the moment that it is out of your control. Nasal breathing is a really key skill here. You would know about this, right? From the performance elements. And nasal breathing has incredible benefits for human health. And one of the key factors is for emotional and nervous system regulation. Your nasal breathing is signaling to your body that you're in a state of safety. Another thing that can do that, which is a way to trick the brain into a state of relaxation, it's a bit of an evolutionary bypass, is that your brain spies on your breathing. And so if you start breathing in a manner of relaxation, your brain starts to believe that you are in a manner of relaxation, regardless of what it is perceiving on the outside. And that's by lengthening your exhalations. So if you can breathe in through your nose and have a really slow, long exhale through your mouth, to begin with, maybe blowing out a candle or through a straw, that is a really good technique to start. And then over time, learning to count. We found that a 1-2 breath, which is an inhale for about 3 seconds or 4 seconds, then an exhale for double the time, about 6 or 8, is a really powerful technique that you can do anywhere, anytime. And if you reinforce this in a place like a cold shower or an ice bath or, a difficult interview or really like whatever it is, you're teaching your system to stay, in the driver's seat in those situations. Eventually, you can extend it further then and really learn that breath control and learn to, the breath is, there are no ends to this, right? I'm only 10 years into this practice, and these tools are very real and they're very tangible. And you can do it on your own. They're relatively free. You can find a good instructor that can
do it on your own.
Yeah. And so do it on your, it's free, man. It's the air that you breathe. It's your God-given right. And back to the original discussion, it is also your connection with Mother Nature. It is the thing that will bridge your head and your heart. And ultimately, right, the trees are exhaling all the carbon dioxide and they're taking the air that we breathe out and recycling it back to us. And I think even that gentle reminder of like, wow, I am one with nature in this moment. If I connect to my breath in a conscious way is, it can shift any thought into a more positive one, right? It can shift any state into a more optimal one.
Two words, Revo Fitness. Here's a few more. Simple, 24/7, reformer Pilates, body scanners, massage chairs, squat racks, free weights, pin and plate loaded equipment, no lock-in contracts, no bullshit. All of that and more from just $9.69 a week. That's surprisingly affordable. Join now at Revo Fitness Windsor Gardens or download the Revo Fitness app, revofitness.com.au, or find the Revo Fitness app in the App Store.
And you mentioned that when, this sort of epiphany happened, when you realised that you were, controlling your breathing, you were doing the cryotherapy stuff. How did that change your life, and what did you go on to achieve after? Whether that was, connecting with the, how did that change your journey moving forward?
Yeah, look, I won't lie. I think in the first couple of years, there was an element of it bolstering my bravado, right? As soon as I got my life back on track and the breathing was giving me this amazing, it was almost like I was tapping into a source that I thought everybody should have access to this, Here I am, and the disease that I had encountered in my gut went away without me taking any type of medication or intervention. That was the thing that really blew my mind. My concentration started to significantly improve to the point where I could now execute tasks that had seemed insurmountable for me beforehand with little effort, right? And I started to get this natural energy, this natural high. And, and then it was, of course, I started to learn from Wim Hof. I traveled over the world to learn from him. Eventually, we worked with him, and that went very quick. Within 6 months of me being an instructor, we stood on stage in Sydney in front of 1,000 people. And here I am banging my chest without my shirt on and getting people to breathe. And this was the energy of Wim, right? And it was like that energy that had been stifled for so long had now been given a channel, right? And the world was listening. Breathwork became incredibly popular. Wow. Wim is largely to thank for that in this time. But I rode the wave of it, and there was a lot of, we did hundreds of workshops. I traveled all around the country to teach people, and people were listening, Eventually we have a retreat center now in the Snowy Mountains. I know that you're familiar with that area as well. I know back in 2019, 20, you were there when I was also there. We would have almost crossed paths. And so, we started to train people how to use these methods. And again, like the world was listening, and we now have clients in major corporations. We teach at government level, and we've brought this into high schools and primary schools. And so it's become a really wonderful field of work. And the breath work today is what I am most passionate about. We've published 2 research papers now, and we've got 2 more in the making, in the process. And the research that we're doing and that is happening around the world is almost revolutionizing our understanding of what well-being actually means. And we're using a lot of different language. It's now physiology is becoming more important than psychology. People are starting to recognize that, hey, wait, if I can actually learn to listen and read the state of my body, that is a bottom-up form of processing that can bypass the level of cognition. And it's almost a shortcut to improving my well-being and my state of being in that sense. And also in the research, we found just the state of the world. So one of the statistics was that since the pandemic, it was already sky high before that, anxiety levels are up by about 30%, and they're only rising, right? And the traditional forms of treatment are falling short. So when people do seek help for their mental health, very much like myself, there's 3 mainstay forms of treatment available to them, right? There's psychotherapy, often mixed with drug therapy, which is medication. And then there's cognitive behavioral therapy, which has become fully integrated into clinical care in the last 10 years. Only 10 to 20% of people that seek help for things like depression, anxiety, the list goes on, are finding that their needs are met. And a lot of those people, we've got 80 to 90% of them simply falling through the cracks, like myself also. And this is where we believe, and our sort of hypothesis is that breath has a significant role to play here. It is easily scalable, right? You can teach it to the masses. We've got a research project with Macquarie Uni at the moment where we've gone one step further and we've gone, can a simple breathing recording, where I do not even need to be there to teach you, it's simply a track of half an hour, similar to the experience that I went through, that thousands of people are going to listen to without any idea of what breathwork is, will they have similar experience? Meaning, can we even remove the element of that? There's almost no cost here. It's incredibly scalable. It's incredibly effective. It works in a really short space of time. And I find personally, it's incredibly empowering. And this is my honest opinion, is this is for everybody. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, the way that it is often delivered, but there is a way that everybody can benefit from a conscious form of breathing. And again, that lights me up to think about, how do we translate this to people in corporations, to high performers, first responders, to school teachers,
to everyone. The thing about it, if you want to better your life and better you, it's like everybody. This fits the human race, right? Let's call it what it is. And you're the founder of Breathless Expeditions. Just talk to me about that and how we can jump on board with yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And this has been the beautiful project, really the last 8 years or so since starting. And we essentially opened a retreat center and also a training center, and we run trips around the world. So we do freediving expeditions to some of the most beautiful places in the world where people learn how to use their breath and how to scale the depths. We do mountain expeditions where we take people into these extreme environments. And it's not only for extreme sports, though. In fact, most of the people that we get are not usually interested in that type of thing, but are looking for a challenge that they can learn to surmount, right? To climb that inner peak, if you will. And then the training and the corporate work, what we do, is what I'm very passionate about and what I had. And so essentially it's a breathwork company. We're currently We train 500 instructors in these methods, and we're hoping to scale that quite rapidly worldwide to really make this work available to anyone, anywhere, and really lift the standard of education in this field as well. And that is a big journey to be on because it is still new. It's a very new space. People have lots of different opinions about what breathing exercises mean, how it should work. There's still a lot of work to be done before this is fully integrated into things like clinical care. But we're working on that very hard at the moment. And I think some of the research that we do is incredibly exciting. So watch this space.
Wow, mate, listen, we're going to finish up on that because that's amazing. Thank you ever so much for joining me. I could have listened to you for hours. I can relate to what you're saying. I've experienced it on a lower scale, on a smaller scale. I'm definitely connected with myself. I like to think that I know myself, and the essence of living is through breathing. And I look forward, mate. I'm really excited to see where you go. You're so young still. You're 30 years old. It's exciting to see how much you're going to develop in another 10 years and then another 20 years. The world's at your feet, and hopefully people will follow you, mate, and jump on board because it's something that will change their lives like it's changed yours. Thank you for coming on, mate. Thanks so much.
So welcome.
To find out more about Johannes Egberts and his work, head to breathlessexpeditions.com. I'll put the link in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of Head Game. If you found this conversation as meaningful as I did, why not share it with a friend? I'm at Middleton. See you on the next episode.
Two words, Revo Fitness. Here's a few more. Simple, 24/7, reformer Pilates, body scanners, massage chairs, squat racks, free weights, pin and plate loaded equipment, no lock-in contracts, no bullshit. All of that and more from just $9.69 a week. That's surprisingly affordable. Join now at Revo Fitness Windsor Gardens or download the Revo Fitness app, revofitness.com.au, or find the Revo Fitness app in the App Store.